coming to the, I've lost count, this is our second or third talk in the New Directions in Scholarly Publications series that's co-sponsored between the Brown University Libraries and the Kogut Center for Humanities. So welcome to that. We invite you, if you are tweeting, it's not too early to do things like that, to use the hashtag New Directions, just so we can sort of collect all of these talks in one place over the semester, or the year. So I have the great pleasure of being able to introduce Dr. Amanda Visconti today. I can't tell you when I first met her, but I can probably tell you where. I think it was at the Center for History and New Media for that camp. That camps, or the Humanity and Technology camp, are, as you might or might not know, unconferences. That means they're self-generated events, planned as they're happening and focused on the intersections of questions of how technology is changing how scholars work and communicate. They're emergent and disruptive and tend to be a whole lot of fun, and I think they're a great metaphor for the work and personality of Dr. Visconti. One example of that work, as you're about to hear, is her dissertation, which resulted in her creation of InfiniteUlysses.com, which is a digital platform for collaborative annotation of James Joyce's novel. Not only did she design a platform sort of from scratch that collected more than 12,000 visitors and 900 annotations in the first weeks of it being live, she also filed the code on GitHub for others to see and wrote an extensive white paper on the project. Her work is just like the Unconference where I met her, unpredictable, surprising, and tech-savvy. It's a model in so many ways for what digital scholarship can look like. During her work at the Maryland Institute for Technology and Humanities, or MITH, where she took her degree, Dr. Visconti worked on a number of other projects, including BitCurator, which is focused on digital preservation, and Digital Dos Passos. But she also won one of the inaugural microgrants from the Association for Computers and the Humanities to visualize scholarly social networks. And she was part of the cross-institutional team that developed Serendiptomatic as part of the One Week, One Tool grant from the NEH. At the present, Dr. Visconti is a digital humanities specialist and assistant professor in the libraries of Purdue University. She holds an information MS with a specialization in digital humanities, human-computer interaction from the University of Michigan. Her talk today is titled, What If We Designed a Digital Edition and Invite Everyone? And please join me in welcoming Dr. Visconti.
So thanks everyone for being here. Humanities scholars are an integral part of the continuum that keeps the stories of the past available to and understood by the present. But just as important is that public of not just scholars, but also readers, artists, and others beyond the academy whose interests keep the humanities alive and relevant. Today I'm going to talk about moving the digital humanities, in particular DH work around literature, from publicly accessible to publicly participatory. I'll use my social reading platform, also known as a digital edition, Infinite Ulysses, as an example of experimenting with this move toward a more publicly engaging humanities. And I'll end with some thoughts about the multiple ways such engagement can be meaningful to both public readers and to researchers. I'm interested in building tools and digital editions that help both literature scholars and the layperson participate in our love for the nuances of a text. And I'm especially interested in how we can use interface design to encourage not just public consumption of, but active participation in the humanities in terms of inclusion, interaction, and pedagogy. Digital humanities scholar Lindsay Thomas has noted that DH often confuses the online with the public, saying that making something freely available online does not necessarily guarantee that thing is public, or that it will be used as a public resource. You can put historical data and artifacts like photos online, as with the Library of Congress's fantastic public hosting of historical photo sets. But if the site is designed for use by people accustomed to online research tools, that's the kind of site use that you'll mostly get with that site. Access improves when the DH project aims at reaching for an audience unfamiliar with research interfaces. For example, the excellent Photogrammer site takes those photos from that Library of Congress site that I just showed you and makes them both easier to search and, moreover, builds into the design of its tools an intuitive sense of what kinds of questions you can ask using the site. So there's designing DH projects for participation, meaning prioritizing public interaction, valuing public contributions, and teaching public visitors how to use digital sites, to get them over that threshold between passive reading and engaged interaction. There's also a more rigorous definition for participatory design that comes from the field of human-computer interaction, or HCI. HCI is a field focused on interfaces between user and computer, including interfaces of reading and research. And this field provides a useful approach to a humanities that simultaneously benefits the public and scholars. Participatory design is an approach not just centered on the scholar or just on the public, but finessing the third space of discussion and shared learning that exists when two groups come into conversation. This approach asks the public to take part in the design process so that the end of a project isn't the first time an audience encounters it or improves it with feedback. In the Infinite Ulysses project I'll be showing you in a few minutes, I melded public participation with participatory design. I both designed the site to welcome and support public participation and also worked with members of my audience, including people who have read Ulysses anywhere from 0 to too many times, and people familiar and unfamiliar with the digital humanities, to improve the site through feedback and through collaborative sketching of ideas for an ideal digital reading interface. When I talk about participatory design, I want these two ideas, participation in a project as well as in its design, to always commingle. There can't be successful design for public participation without some input from the public. And the more we work alongside and for this audience directly, the better we can support them and share ownership of a project with them. Digital humanities projects have a history of allowing public access, with many of them made available on the early web. One of my colleagues described his first time surfing the William Blake Archive up on the screen in the 1990s. The Blake Archive was an early and excellent online resource for working with digital versions of William Blake's incredibly rich writing and art compositions. He reported tears rolling down his cheeks as he realized that we were moving into this world where scholarship would no longer be completely bound by travel budgets and special access to rare materials. Indeed, it's become the norm today for digital humanities projects to be available without a paywall, for anyone who knows that they're there and how to use them. And there are a number of projects online now that are, like the Blake Archive, award-winning, gorgeous, serious tools for scholarly research. Both projects aimed at scholars and those aimed at the public are important. My interest in the latter stems from the far smaller degree to which digital humanists have designed for public participation, and my belief that humanities scholars don't morally fulfill our charge to preserve and make relevant our cultural heritage if we only do so for our fellow scholars. Sites that are built for experts familiar with the field's assumptions may be easy for those experts to use. For example, this is about a fifth of the Blake Archive's advanced search page. You can tell that this is a rich site with a wealth of interesting ways to search its data. But for site visitors without familiarity with faceted search tools and other research interfaces, a digital humanities site may be technically public, but in practice is limited to use by scholars. Being acquainted with academia changes what aspects of design we see as intuitive, and how we judge a site's credibility. The only ways for academics to build for audiences unfamiliar with various digital academic commonplaces is to work directly with these audiences. Whether we're seeking public assistance or making our scholarly efforts meaningful beyond those who already have advanced knowledge in our field, the digital placement of our work means that it's more easily accessible to more people than 30 years ago. But virtual access doesn't mean much if new site visitors are bouncing off your site without using it. So how do we design the interfaces of digital humanities projects to see real public participation? Some good news, there are already many exemplary public humanities or crowdsourcing projects out there, enough that I'm going to dash by a handful up on the screen as I talk and really only scratch the surface. I'll tweet some links to these after my talk, or you can check out crowdconsortium.org for some good links to projects that are built for communities of public volunteers. Many of these crowd projects are aimed at history and/or museum collections, which often means they're designed around tasks such as transcribing soldiers' diaries, tagging historical photos, and mapping historical event locations. Far less work has been done with DH projects that are outright literary in nature, although there are examples like the NYPL's online Candide and the projected work of the Shelley Godwin Archive. There are also public digital literary projects that we sometimes forget to think of as digital public literature, like Project Gutenberg. There's not a thriving past of public literature projects for digital humanists to build on, though, in the same way that there is a public history work to build on. This means that tasks related to literature, such as holding interpretive conversations online and annotating text with interpretations, haven't been as much explored. There is, however, an excellent bunch of projects to look at and people to talk to if you're interested in shared high-level concerns of public humanities projects, like how to attract a user community and support them once they've arrived. So I've been focusing on design for participation in literature, this area without as much digital public work as some other fields. Attempting to design for participation with just one specific DH project has already taught me a lot about what such an online, community-focused literary site might look like. How do you take something that people interact with in print, like this, and replicate it in a space that looks more like this on the right? I'd like to turn now to my recent and ongoing experiment, the InfiniteUlysses.com social reading platform, or digital edition. So what if we build a digital edition and invite everyone? What if millions of scholars, first-time readers, book clubs, teachers and their students show up and annotate a text with their infinite annotations, that is, digital marginalia of interpretations, questions, contextualizations, and other comments? I've studied how to improve the design and functionality of a key artifact of the digital humanities, the digital literary edition, through both brainstorming around this unlikely hypothetical and through feedback from an actual modestly sized community of edition readers with thousands of site visitors and hundreds of site accounts and user-authored annotations so far. If we're serious about using the digital humanities to make the humanities more open, we should start designing now to handle large numbers of online visitors, especially when doing so helps us think about problems of curation and moderation present even in DH projects with very small public audiences. This is a signal versus noise filtering problem. If everyone's submitting annotations to a digital reading platform, how can we automate the massive task of curation and moderation so that it occurs in a timely manner with biases as exposed as possible? And once we've separated the wheat from the chaff, or the wheat of useful yet diverse annotations from the chaff of repetitions, spam, and undersubstantiated suggestions, how do we make the still plentiful remaining material accessible to the users it would best serve? That is, how do we separate the signal from the noise when the signal of pertinent annotations means different things for different reader needs? I'll show you how I address this issue in a moment, but first I'd like to just mention why I chose the novel Ulysses for my project. Ulysses lives at a fairly unique location of both requiring help to read and having an international fan base. Enthusiasts who tweet about their determination to finally read Ulysses this year, add the novel to their bucket lists, and hold reunions with book club's classmates with which they first read the novel for the first time years ago. There's even a yearly holiday held on the day the book takes place, an international affair with enthusiasts dressing up as characters and holding readings of the book and drinking. There are certainly other books that are difficult, and there are other books that have large fan bases. Ulysses is fairly unique, though, in its combination of extreme reading difficulty, a public that has often heard of the novel, and this excitement and fan base of returning readers. This makes it perfect for a participatory digital edition experiment. When building a small DH project to try out ideas for broader design rules, it's important that the content is as exciting and inviting as what you build around it. How people feel about Ulysses made it likely that my participatory experiment would see actual participation, so that I could get a useful sense of how to make the site a better experience. I'll give you now just a really brief tour of the social reading experiment that I created. This is the current front page of the Infinite Ulysses digital edition at InfiniteUlysses.com. The images give a high-level tour of the edition's features. You can highlight parts of the book and annotate those highlights, read others' annotations, and personalize what annotations you see to your background, interests, and needs. When an allusion to Hamlet appears in the text, an annotator might highlight it, explain the reference, and also tag that annotation with terms like intertextuality, allusion, Shakespeare, and Hamlet. Other popular tags mark if an annotation translates a specific language, French, Latin, Irish. refers to a specific author or book or to Joyce's biography, or relates to a topic such as modernist style, colonialism, or religion. So far, popular things to annotate and tag have been Joyce's allusions to other works of literature and to his own previous works. Over time, we should begin to get a picture of where certain types of language or themes appear in the book by charting where these tags appear. Readers click on highlighted text to see any annotations tied to that highlight. These annotations appear in the sidebar. To prevent certain annotations from never being read, which is a real issue unless every site visitor wishes to sit and rank every annotation, the initial display of annotations for the page and for any clicked highlight is a random sampling of all available annotations. Each annotation on the text can receive either one upvote or one downvote from each reader, letting the community collectively measure something. Social voting is frequently cited as a false democratizer, but since I was building in part on online communities that use voting, like Reddit and Stack Exchange, I wanted to assess this for myself. I'm currently thinking about ways to replace this voting, for example with a checkbox next to the words, "This was useful to me," or by imitating the retail store review site Yelp.com, on which each review has 3 clickable buttons marked useful, funny, and cool as a quick way to note different types of positive reactions to a user's comment. Annotation votes, or in the future, whatever replaces them, will also accrue to the user who authored those annotations, so that helpfulness and credibility of annotators can also be very roughly assessed. This metadata allows readers to prioritize what annotations they are shown when a word or phrase has multiple annotations. For example, a reader can choose to see the top-rated annotations first, or the newest annotations first. Readers can also favorite annotations. For now, this just gives them a list of favorites on their profile page. Eventually, I'd like to tie this favoriting into the filtering system, so users can easily create a custom edition with just their chosen annotations displayed. A reader might curate a set of annotations that provide clues to Ulysses' mysteries, track how religion is handled in the book, or support arguments made in their journal article or book club. Readers can filter annotations to only display annotations dealing with areas of interest. For example, if you're interested in references to Shakespeare's plays or humor. Readers can also filter to only display annotations authored by certain users. For example, if you only want to see annotations by other users that are also first-time readers of the book. In terms of code, my biggest intervention was to create a module that ties the highlighting of text from the annotator tool into how Drupal lets you add metadata to, filter, and sort units of content such as annotations. This was a way to address my speculative experiment. If the edition wanted to support thousands of readers from all different backgrounds and their annotations, how would each reader find their particular signal in the noise from all those annotations? More importantly, though, these social features, filtering and sorting, addressed a much more modest but realistic need at the level of hundreds of readers. The most annotated page on the site has 58 annotations on it, with the next 10 most annotated pages each having between 50 and 25 annotations per page. Even at the level of an edition just beginning to see use, there were already too many annotations per page for most readers. We already need a way to filter out the distraction of the annotations that don't fit our interests. In particular, the site has been read by both first-time readers of the novel and professors who have taught the text. Sorting and filtering helps get the appropriate granularity of annotation to each reader, whether that's what does this word mean, or how does this dialogue fit into what we know about Joyce's opinions on Irish politics? So is there public interest in something like this? I'm optimistically interpreting the data so far to say that there is. Because the site is in beta mode and the open beta period was followed by my defending a dissertation and seeking a job, little tasks like that, I haven't yet coordinated any sort of sustained publicity or outreach, though that's something I'll be doing soon now. Given the lack of coordinated publicity, I think the involvement the site has gotten so far, though, weighted as it is towards the month of the open beta testing period, is a good testament to the public interest in joining a social conversation around Ulysses. The site did see over 13,000 unique visitors during its first month of open beta, which felt pretty decent for a dissertation project in a literature department. From those visitors, we had about 500 user accounts and about 500 annotations. By last month, October, after several months of basically no publicity or community outreach, we've had over 17,000 unique visitors, just over 650 verified members, and we just passed 1,000 annotations. I should mention that 3/4 of those annotations are by people other than me. 44 users have each added at least one annotation, and all but 5 of those are people I've never met of or heard before. 7 users have each added over 10 annotations, with 2 power users other than me, who were strangers to me, adding 159 and 470 annotations respectively. There's definitely interest in a participatory literary conversation like this, but the next steps will be building in features that reward return readers and that encourage people who are reading but not annotating to share their thoughts with the community. So let's turn from this proof of concept to the larger issue of digital humanities participatory design. The template provided by Public History Projects suggests public humanities scholars need to explicitly decide for what type of engagement they are designing. Site visitors can be passive consumers, or they can interact with the scholars who created a project. Digital humanities designers can also choose whether they value any level of engagement with their project, or whether they want to scaffold critical engagement by teaching a site users the terminology and rhetoric required to interact with academics on a critical level. For public participation in literature, a common mechanic is allowing users to annotate literary texts. Annotations are internet comments, so they come with all the baggage that entails from years of poorly managed internet comment sections. Discussion sections on websites do have some work to do, although recent research suggests that getting rid of comments isn't the answer, and putting more effort into seeding comments, sections, tones, and etiquette succeeds. Part of what defines a scholar as a scholar is their mastery of a certain rhetoric for questioning, seeking, arguing, and debating. Expecting the public to engage in discussion in the same way, without teaching them how to do so, without teaching them this rhetoric, makes no sense. Making many substantive discussions on the internet do work, such as good academic or activist Twitter conversations, and crowdsourced interpretation, like the public commenters on items in the Ransom Center Flickr group for manuscript fragments. I noticed that the term meaningful sometimes gets used synonymously with critical as a descriptor of crowdsourcing. To be able to talk about critical engagement, I'll use critical somewhat synonymously with what academics do. Researching an idea, marshaling proofs for an interpretation, making your exploration of theories accessible to others in the intellectual community by adhering to certain standards and conventions of scholarly rhetoric. These are time-tested ways of making knowledge, but they're also ways of discussion that take time and privilege to learn and practice. Critical engagement is often contrasted with passive engagement, or with activities that don't necessarily cause a close relationship to a text, like adding a tag. This isn't a terrible state of affairs. Designing projects to enfranchise the public with the tools to take part in academic conversations is an excellent goal. But when designing for critical engagement isn't on the cards, whether through lack of expertise, funding, or time, there are other types of meaningful public engagement, both in terms of meaningful audience experiences and the public support of meaningful intellectual work and results. Online communities outside academia already are working on engaging thoughtful site use. How can we borrow successful social mechanics from these existing communities, mechanics like upvoting and reputation-based privileges, to create reading and research experiences that adeptly handle not only issues of user-authored text quantity, but also quality? Infinite Ulysses built on existing exemplars of community content submission and discussion, Stack Exchange and Reddit, to thriving hubs of site users interacting with digital text. Readers on these sites aren't interacting with literary editions. The success of the mechanism supporting their interactions is to a degree text agnostic, though relying more on an understanding of how people interact online than with what content they're interacting. Besides borrowing specific mechanisms such as upvoting and a queue for unanswered questions, Infinite Ulysses benefits from several broader lessons suggested by these online community platforms. Things I learned from Reddit's social economy included the importance and biases of sorting order when a single piece of content has multiple user annotations. Figuring out how to approximate Stack Exchange and Reddit's systems of reputation was another challenge. I both wanted to encourage first-time readers of Ulysses and readers from outside the university to comment and be heard, while also letting readers be aware if another user had some particular expertise. For example, if they could translate Latin or had taught Ulysses in the past. I also thought about how seeding a site with good content and concisely expressing community rules has worked to different extents. Looking in particular at two subreddits, these are forums within the Reddit site, the Funny subreddit, which is full of memes and reposts, and the Ask Historians subreddit, which has a well-expressed, targeted focus on history and a clear method of demonstrating and being recognized for expertise that also doesn't discriminate based on formal education. This subreddit also gains quality from its relatively small size and higher moderator to commenter ratio than the Funny subreddit, pointing to the need for different tactics for online communities at different orders of audience magnitude. So, should participatory digital editions always aim for critical public engagement? My answer is no. There are other worthwhile goals that sit between critical and passive engagement on the spectrum of participation. We need to design for valuing public contributions of all kinds, both as part of the humanities mandate to maintain the relevancy of past and present culture, but also because failing to do so misses out on a goldmine of what Donald Brinkman has called deep data, deep, particular knowledge about cultural artifacts, as opposed to the sometimes facile data that gets bundled up into big data projects. What does deep data about literary texts mean? Does it necessitate critical disputation? Or do we need more diverse types of metadata around texts in order to know texts more intimately? For a digital edition allowing public annotations, as with Infinite Ulysses, one might worry that readers annotating without critical training would produce annotations of little value. Leaving aside that there are other useful types of annotation than critical interpretations, definitions, translations, questions, and contextualizations, for example, I did a little thought experiment to decide how I'd moderate once the site went live. If readers left a bunch of annotations like this example up on the screen, OMG, this guy again, heart, when a favorite character appears, would this be inappropriate to the site? I don't mean spam or troll comments, just comments that don't fit our expectations for critical textual annotation, and maybe aren't obviously meaningful to knowing the text because of that. Could such annotations help other readers? Do they advance what we know about the text? I decided that the answer to both questions was yes. I wanted every type of reader engagement, whether or not they followed the norms of critical annotation. Moderating out annotations like this one might cut out useful knowledge. With my example, I very much do want to know if readers don't identify with the major character, Stephen, and are delighted when his friendly antagonist, Buck Mulligan, shows up to lighten the mood. Users choosing to read the novel on this participatory digital edition, whether teachers prepping for a seminar on the novel or first-time readers, will want to know how other readers feel about the text. I considered replacing such non-critical annotations with a comment like, X readers, 4, 6, however many, were excited to see the character Mulligan again. Keeping such comments in users' original words, though, lets readers see their contributions are valued, and it also preserves the mood of each reader's particular reaction to the text. For readers who wouldn't be well served by encountering this type of annotation, application of a tag such as emotion, reading experience, or reader in-jokes lets these users filter such annotations from view. Participatory editions need not force every reader interaction into the strictures of a contribution to critical understanding of the novel. I suspect that when online and museum have your say projects have failed in the past, it's been because the designers weren't clear on the goals for participation of the audience, weren't clear on the goals for participation or the audience for visitor-created content, didn't seed a project with example input or otherwise modeled the type of input that they sought, and or valued but didn't teach critical engagement. So what deep or substantive information, then, can be drawn from public commentary that isn't critical, that doesn't use the rhetoric of scholarly critique, or seem to involve deep thought towards producing new knowledge? I've started to put together a list of alternative information commenters can create that either helps them feel a deeper understanding of cultural material, or that scholars can use to accrue meaning to a text or its interpreting edition. In the latter scenario, a participatory site would want that learning to be shared back with the public, thus becoming meaningful through their participation in creating that knowledge. Metadata about a digital text's use can be gathered from the automated filling of author and date fields on reader comments and annotations. Work with non-written evidence of use in print books such as Catherine Rudy's use of densitometers. These are machines that measure the darkness of a reflecting surface to detect where fingerprints have left old print pages of a book most dirty, and therefore most thumbed, most used, most looked at, is similar to the use of a tool like Google Analytics with the digital edition, which also collects anonymous, aggregated data on digital edition use. Where a print edition might show dog-eared corners, anonymous site analytics can help us understand factors like what pages in a book are most annotated, or what pages in a book saw the most users leave the site and never come back. Non-critical public comments can identify unexpected disagreements or relevancies, and otherwise help us understand an edition's use, usability, and usefulness. Methods for literary textual analysis, such as topic modeling, can also be applied to a text's comments and annotations to discover themes and frequent word choices. Public user comments can help identify cross-collection values and similarities for archives of editions. And I'm expecting we'll identify even more ways such participation is meaningful, the more projects designed for participation in literature projects. So here are 3 areas where I'll be taking my next steps with the project. First, I want to contribute to best practices in digital humanities design for the public, particularly by helping DHers focus on and work with specific audiences. If the audience you're trying to design for is just described as a general audience, you're going to have problems. That's so broad a category as to be non-existent. But it's also worth noting that a scholarly and a public audience need not always be exclusive of each other. I do feel that non-designers in the humanities are too quick to repeat the cliched, you can't design for multiple audiences, instead of thinking, how do I design for this space where we learn together? Can I prioritize several audiences and look for overlapping needs and activities? In a formal user study of public visitors to scholarly digital humanities sites, I found that some of the greatest barriers to public use could be fixed without prejudice to the existing scholarly audience. Public visitors largely wanted simple changes, such as adding information on what a tool can do and the possible ways of using it, and being careful about using terms of art like full-text search, even if a phrase's meaning seems obvious to scholars. If you're declarative about your order of priorities for reaching different types of audience, you can also look for overlaps among needs of different groups. For example, providing a way for readers to highlight parts of Ulysses and ask questions about it served both actual first-time readers of the novel who had questions, these were my prioritized audience, but it also served teachers who were familiar with the novel from multiple readings, but wanted to be reminded of the kinds of questions that stump first-time readers while prepping for teaching a class about the book. In addition to seeking these overlaps, I'll refine my audience outreach. I'm expecting that a majority of the site's visitors will always arrive just looking for help reading Ulysses. The 1.0 version of the site will offer these readers a minimal, clean reading text that only shows annotations carefully curated for first-time reading. A second version of the text will exist separately for scholars, second and nth-time readers, and anyone else interested in curating and filtering their own annotation experience or playing with other experimental reading tools, such as alternate web page designs or visualizations. The site analytics shows that there are enough people interested in a site like this to visit it. Now I want to focus on serving those site visitors by turning them into repeat readers on the site. I want to think about who isn't currently being served by the available Ulysses resources, for whom have college courses and print handbooks not been enough help or motivation. I'm hoping that by first solidly serving those underserved readers in the public, while still having the second text to experiment with cool DHE things like annotation personalization, that active participants comfortable with annotating on the site will follow from repeat readers, and that other uses, including scholarly ones, will grow from that participation. Relatedly, there's a lot of work to do on the level of graphic design to make the site a more delightful experience. I really didn't have as much time as I would have liked to spend on the site aesthetics during the dissertation, and improvements to functionality on the site sometimes came at the cost of its looks or accessibility. The 1.0 version of the site, with the help of all the feedback that I've gained from beta testers, will be something that you can comfortably read, say, in an armchair with your tablet, and I've really enjoyed having some more time to lavish on the visual appearance. Another thing that I'll be working on is to improve the personalization of annotation display as I started playing with in Infinite Ulysses, the beta version. We need to proceed with the knowledge that in most cases, no one wants to or has time to read everything, all the comments or all the annotations. On the other hand, we want to avoid an echo chamber effect and broaden people's worldview by exposing them to some annotations not suggested by their background or interests. Some of this work will bring studies of Facebook algorithms into an academic context. How can we balance the kind of content a person likes to see with highly rated content from a different viewpoint? And drawing from studies of online newspaper comment sections, we need to also think about ethical, sustainable models for human curation and moderation. Seeding a site with good content and training users to be pedagogical rather than defensive with one another can go a long way towards making online discussions good and welcoming spaces. But we need to make sure that the significant labor that goes into this, the human labor, is recognized and credited. And finally, we need more practice designing for and debating facets of the community building and outreach aspects of such projects. If we want to build care, inclusion, and respect into public DH projects from the ground up, DH projects creators as a community need more open conversations around issues like the ethics of site analytics and user privacy. We need to think about how we can continue the shift in thinking from crowdsourcing to community building and focus on creating opportunities for meaningful participation and reciprocity rather than unattributed labor. And we need to think about balancing the helpfulness of identifying and highlighting project participants who have special expertise, such as Ulysses scholars on the Infinite Ulysses site, with showing people with alternative expertise and backgrounds and experience that their participation is valued as well. Like the majority of coding projects, my coding and design builds on existing code, especially the Annotator JavaScript tool, various Drupal modules, and some huge improvements to the Drupal version of Annotator crafted by Stanford's awesome Michael Widener in his work on the Lacuna Stories project. I'm also grateful to the readers, annotators, and testers of the site, which have made it live, and to academic and financial support from MITH and the University of Maryland English Department and College of Arts and Humanities during my dissertation, my awesome dissertation committee headed by Matt Kirschenbaum, and by my current employer, the Purdue Libraries, for all helping me realize this project. And finally, thank you all for coming today.
So, questions. We expect participation. This room has been designed for it. Insofar as if you do not ask questions, I will shock you.
First of all, thank you so much. I was really struck by so many of your ideas, particularly the ethical responsibility that we have to reach out to the public and participate with them rather than just opening our sites. My question revolves around multilingual communities. Obviously, a group of users reading Ulysses are working in an Anglophone environment, but many of us work in other places and are principally, and our ethical responsibilities extend to people who are not Anglophone, but we're also publishing in English on our sites and accommodating those languages. Have you thought about this at all, or are there model sites that you can mention that accomplish the bringing together of communities that might not share language?
That's a good question, and I've thought about it only a little bit insofar as I've gotten feedback from users, and I think a big thing on the site is just make it very obvious where you can give feedback when you run into a problem or an issue where you're not being served. One person I heard from was from Korea and said, I would really like there to be audio on the site. I can read things, but I don't know how to pronounce them. I don't know how to read them out loud, which was fantastic to hear because I hadn't thought of it. Trying to think of example projects. I guess one thing that one would want to think about is in shaping the etiquette of your comment section or annotations, how that differs with different languages, with different translations of words and the context of words that goes along with that. I can't think at the moment of a site that specifically has been built to deal with that. That's a really interesting question.
Well, my question was really way below the level of your very excellent talk, which is there going to be a version that can read it on this?
Yes. Yes, so that was another thing. So this was most of my dissertation. My dissertation was design code, user testing, blogging about every month, and I did a white paper during the last 3 weeks of the dissertation. So really a debriefing of the whole project. It wasn't chapters, it wasn't a monograph. And because of that, a big issue with this was scope and what can I produce to make something that can actually be user tested and built on by other people, and also defend and like go and get a job and things like that. So that was one thing that I ended up, as I would change functionalities, the design broke in various ways, and I ended up just having something you could use on a laptop, which is terrible both in terms of accessibility. I had people write me and say, I need this magnified and I can't read it because of how you have it set up. And in terms of how people actually most comfortably like to read, I've had people say that this would totally be the way that I read Ulysses if I can sit in my armchair and look on my tablet and read it. And the phone is another way to think about that. The next design that I'm working on will be tablet and phone friendly. And I've been thinking a bit about what is the most minimal version of the site that will allow that. I think splitting the text into the two different texts, where one is really focused on that, like 90% of people who just want reading and annotations and don't necessarily need all the, I can favorite this and there's all these tools and stuff. That'll make this tablet and phone design a lot easier because there's less things to fit on the screen. So that's definitely something that I'm thinking about and have heard from people wanting it. And yeah, I have a huge list of things that I would like to add that the big struggle with the dissertation is to keep the scope of something like this reasonable. So I'm glad that you're interested in that, because I've been wondering how many people want to use a phone or use a tablet. I can look at my analytics and see how many people visit the site using a phone, for example, and then immediately leave, and it's very large. So
I will say the message that pops up is very polite. It just says, sorry, this won't fit on your screen. It's interesting.
Yeah, thank you for an excellent presentation. I just want to pick up on the first comment as well, because it seems to me that it will be increasingly important to have platforms that allow access by a very wide range of linguistic communities. But it also seems to me that the kinds of technology that would allow for that and allow people to select what kinds of linguistic communities they feel comfortable participating seems to already be there. So that if you were, say, only a speaker of French and you only wanted to have French comments, you could just click on that and do that. I also see that we're at the John Carter Brown Library, where we've been exploring a platform called Slack. You may have heard of it.
There is a digital humanities Slack now, by the way. If you Google it and you're at all interested in the digital humanities, come join us and message about digital humanities stuff.
Interesting. That's great. Well, I've downloaded Slack, but I have not yet. I was worried about actually getting caught up in all of the messages, so I haven't yet engaged. But it seems to me there also you can very easily select different groups and not only topics, but groups that you can participate in. And I see from your project a really important resolution of a problem that I've seen, which is how to create different communities within a single text that is not in any way exclusive, but that allows people to decide what level of engagement of in a particular text they want. We would love to be able to open up our texts and make them comprehensible to, say, 6th graders who are doing a project on the origins of a particular document, and we want that to be a curated site. They don't need all of the other information. So it seems to me like you're really on the right track as far as that goes.
Well, thank you. And that kind of is the big challenge of, I showed that picture of the Blake advanced search page before that has 1 million search boxes on it, and it's fantastic that you can search that specifically for your interests, but at the same time, it's unwieldy. Most readers come to the site and don't want to go through and pick all their things. So how can I, on one hand, kind of, as a human curator or algorithmically suggest things like, oh, you're a first-time reader, maybe you want to follow these people and like these tags, at the same time not shape things and be like, oh, you're a first-time reader, you're obviously not interested in, or ready for or whatever. So that'll be a really interesting thing as I go forward to work with this idea of filtering and personalization and how we offload some of the effort while at the same time not putting people in boxes or kind of having the echo chamber thing.
Can I just ask you one question about that, which is, do you see, where do you see, like, from a more meta perspective, you have one project, there are obviously other people's projects, there are people who work in the early modern. Are you optimistic about a kind of convergence happening, or because it's a little bit bewildering for those of us who are hoping for these kinds of tools but not directly engaged?
I am optimistic, and it might just be because I'm tuned into, if I see annotation, I read it. The two things that I know that are going on right now that are big, one thing's bigger. The bigger thing is the Hypothesis tool, which is trying to add annotation just to any web page. And it has a lot of things like you can talk just with your group and annotate a PDF that you're reading. And that's fantastic, and I'm seeing more and more adoption of that. And that's exciting just in terms of, can we make this the comment section on the internet that works? They're working really hard, they're open source, they have good values, it might happen. The smaller but big to me thing that I'm working on is a thing that we've gotten a couple internal grants at Purdue for, me and Dino Faluga, who is in the English department. He has a Victorian site, the Branch Collective, that is a scholarly site for Victorian texts. And we're working with a couple other literary period websites, Romantic Circles, for example, at UMD, Infinite Ulysses. And we're working to bring people together with these different literary period sites and say, can we have the same backend? Can we all use Drupal? And then when somebody builds a tool, like I built some stuff for Infinite Ulysses, every site gets to use it. And that's really nice. We have to think in terms of long-term preservation. Is the Drupal going to be the good thing to buy into, or are we going to be really sad that everyone got on Drupal in the end? There's all these technical concerns, but there is the hope that we can do a lot of not reinventing the wheel and making something immediately open to everyone else to use. And the fun and challenging question from that comes to, we have this data set now of annotations of scholars and students that are reading on Victorian texts, they're reading medieval texts, they're reading James Joyce, and we all have this together. That's a really fun data set to work with and to think about what is people's reading behavior with these complex texts. How do we work with it while at the same time making it very noticeable and easy to understand to our readers what we can see of what they're doing, how we're working with it. Are they comfortable with that? Are they comfortable with how their intellectual property is being used? So going forward, I want to be really careful to always be thinking about the readers as actual people, always be thinking about if you see someone's annotation, you should see their name right next to it so that you immediately know it's not my 1,000 annotations on the site. People have put real work into this. So there are a lot of fun questions, and I think the feeling in the annotation community is very attuned to the things that I care about in terms of giving people credit, preventing things from becoming places where people anonymously troll each other and terrible things happen. So I'm optimistic from what I'm seeing. And I'm hoping that I see more public literature projects as these tools become something other people can use, because it is a big amount of human labor to sit and moderate every annotation. So we need some algorithmic help, but hopefully we can build something where it's less effort for people who want to have a community like this but don't have the technical skills to set something up and solve all of these problems.
So I'm going to be very rude and ask a question before I go back to the audience. We have a grant from the Mellon Foundation here at Brown that is aimed at producing digital publications. So, and thinking about broadly, how do we credit or recognize these things for promotion and tenure, and how do they count it when we're used to counting print-based objects? So can you say anything about how difficult this was for you to get University of Maryland to say, yeah, okay, that maybe is a dissertation, or because you're not yet going up for tenure or promotion with this as an object, but what was that process like? Was it something that they just bought into wholeheartedly, or? Sure.
So one thing that I did was, as I was designing this, I looked to promotion and tenure documents for digital humanists, because there's at least more of those than there is for doing a fully digital dissertation out there. So there's not as much to pull from digital dissertations to help people seeking tenure, unfortunately. I had a really positive experience, and I'm really lucky in that. And I know that there are a lot of privileges that went into that. I was at University of Maryland. I had worked at the Myth DH Center that was there before, and I went to there for my PhD program knowing I could work with people there. That said, I've been trying to pull out the things that might be useful for other people in this experience, and a big thing that went into it was finding and identifying all the people early on who had a say, who could say, like, no, you have to write chapters, or like, no, you don't graduate. And that turned out to be kind of the expected people, you know, advisors, department, graduate school dean, and the librarian who presses the ingest button on the website for the repository of dissertations. And just really early on talking with them, and I developed kind of just a page that had 2 paragraphs on it, and one was why I can't do this in any other form, why is this the best form for making the argument I want to make, and what is the actual work that I am doing in lay language, how much effort does it take, how much critical thinking does it take to do this code, and how will I have it be evaluated. And having that, I just went around to people, and they were really receptive when I was able to show them this is a scholarly thought that is going into this. These are scholars that you know of who are tenured professors who are doing digital work like this. You think of them as scholars, right? Well, then you want to accept this as scholarly too. So that was a good thing for me. I had a really welcoming and lucky experience, I think. And I'm really glad that it went well in terms of, I'm hoping people can point to this and say, well, you know, this person did it, I can do it now too. Another thing that was really helpful was thinking about precedents that weren't digital humanities work, but that still pointed to doing this kind of a project. I'm a textual scholar, so we have a history of people producing print scholarly editions as full dissertations in my field. We have this history of making and building something, so I was able to point to that, even though it was digital, even though it's a digital edition and really not a digital scholarly edition, but that was something that I could point to. So I would say look both for scholars that are doing digital work in your area that people are used to respecting, and use that as, you know, this is critical as a way to compare what you're wanting to do, and also looking at precedents from various fields, whether it's your own or if you're saying StudiArt, this is what they do, they build something, this is how they have a critical writing component. Being able to draw and point to things that are recognizable, I found really helpful for people.
Hi. So first, thank you for this talk. It was fascinating, and really, I'm excited to check out what's going on with it. My question refers more to moderation in terms of how you conceptualize doing moderation on a larger scale and as you're publicizing things, because it seems like as I'm reading more through, like, well, first of all, through code switching, right, even between like Reddit or Twitter or Facebook, those are very different kind of ways you express oneself. And even as I'm reading through more comments, even on like YouTube series or whatever, people who don't necessarily differentiate between there, and there still can have incredibly perceptive ideas of what is going on with certain areas. So I guess my question in terms of how you're thinking about both human and automatic moderation and the goal of creating a critical edition, are there any rules you guys are following in terms of, you know, what gets moderated or what doesn't get moderated, given the fact that even, you know, if we're thinking about code switching beyond just languages, but even things like, for example, AAVE, where it is, you know, an official vernacular, but does not necessarily fit in with the standard descriptive practices that might be used otherwise to moderate comments.
That's an interesting question, and one I know I thought about a lot. I was, in some senses, I wanted to see more challenging annotations to think about these with than I did. My example one is one that no one actually put on the site, though someone might now that I've talked about it a lot. One thing that helped me is to think about myself as a traditional editor and saying, like, in the end, this is my site, or hopefully it's going to be a bunch of people's site soon as I bring more people to work on it. And by making the code accessible for other people, and in the future by trying to do documentation that's good enough that somebody could just make a complete copy of the site. If I can write documentation that good, I would be really happy to see someone just, you know, build their own site, because people know that this is my work. I talk about it. Tweeting and blogging has that effect of people know that I did it. I'm not scared about people building their own alternative, you know, like Dark Ulysses site or something. But it frees me a little bit, because there are types of annotations that I think about that are good and are in good faith that maybe just don't work. If someone has a bee in their bonnet about some really specific niche war history, I don't know, that they, write pages and pages in this little pop-up text box. No one wants to, my site isn't built for them to comfortably read that. So what do I do with that? And just thinking about myself as, well, it's okay, I'm an editor. They have other places that they can go. This isn't, I don't have to think of it as allowing absolutely everything has been helpful. I'm really looking forward to more test cases, which I think I'll get like that over time and have to address. And hopefully can use things like Twitter and just talking to people in person to kind of gauge what people's reactions are. The question about things like spelling and vernacular, and that's really interesting too. And again, I wish I had been challenged more with actual annotations that were like that. It's going to be a case-by-case basis, I think, and a lot of the human work is going to have to come in there, just because I really want to recognize people's contributions as they are. And if you see your annotation, but you notice somebody's been doing something with it, you don't feel as good about it. And if it's readable, but just different looking, not, not critical looking, not punctuated in the right way or something, as long as people can read it, I think it's good both for the author and for the audience to realize, hey, there are people that express themselves in this way that are just as useful for me to read as this other thing that I'm used to. I'm trying to think beyond that. That's a really interesting question. I think it's a kind of an ongoing thing that I don't have a pat and finished answer to. One thing that might be good or might not will be, again, this division of the site into like people just really want this, like a digital way of reading Ulysses, and then have the site where people experiment and where everything is really open and free, and potentially just like all annotations that aren't, like troll comments, aren't spam, aren't hateful, can live there. The long ones, the ones that are all emoji, things like that, and kind of using that as a place to experiment and see, well, how many people actually read this? How many people mark it as useful? Might be one way to deal with that. And thinking about the Yelp site that has, I think, useful, funny, and cool buttons on its comments or its annotations, I might build from that and think about, well, what are the adjectives that I'd like to put on things that people can say, not this was useful, but like this made me feel comfortable. Like I saw someone who wrote in a way, they wrote just what I was thinking and just how I had expressed it. If I could find an adjective for that and make that something people could mark, that might be one way to think about that.
Sure.
I was wondering, you just mentioned before you started talking that this project was on GitHub, and I was interested in more the open source aspect of this kind of project. I think that in terms of like the spirit of the project, it's to me, it's very important that other people have an opportunity to contribute to this project. And I was wondering how much you've considered kind of the public discourse on the actual software, like the public discourse on the actual user interface, like how these people that, in addition to annotating the text, also influence, like how the public also influences the actual software and how they specifically interact with the text.
Mm-hmm. That's an awesome question. The first thing that I should point out is right now, some of the code that I'm using was shared generously with me by the Lacuna Stories project, but they are doing their public release like any time now, like in the next week or two. So there's actually a bit of code that isn't public, and once I have that available to share, once they've shared it themselves, the entire body of code will be up there for people to use and replicate, hopefully. I've had one person who has visited the GitHub repository and added issues, maybe two people actually, which has been really nice in terms of people saying not just, oh, this is a finished site, but like, oh, I know there's code behind this and I want to talk about it and I want to tell you things that I noticed with it. Another piece of this is that writing this as part of a dissertation in an English department, what was evaluated was the final product. I had people that were textual scholars that could think about digital editions, that were used to talking about digital humanities interfaces, but none of them were able to read my code. And actually going back to Brian's question, one thing that I did was create this manifest of like all the work that went into the dissertation, from presentations through the code, and to say, I wrote X lines of JavaScript, I wrote X lines of PHP, and then going on and explaining both what the work to do that was like, what were the questions that I had to think about, and why X lines of PHP doesn't have any parallel with Y pages of monograph chapter, because usually you want less lines of code and not more. So that was one thing that I included, that was letting people actually see, like, this is the work that you did, and now I can understand it even though I can't evaluate your code. That's a step that I would really like to see starting to happen, is people coming in and helping me with my code and saying, you can make this more concise, you can make this better, you made choices here. Maybe there are biases in my choices that I want to change, and having people build off the code. So those are all some things that I've been thinking about with it. In terms of public discourse around the user interface, one thing I want to do a lot more is this participatory design exercise that I did a little bit back in January, where I had readers actually come and sketch with me what they wanted on the site. I think that's one really nice way for people to interact with me, where I'm not only getting feedback, but I can sit down with them, and if they say, oh, I want this, I can try to explain, well, like, this is why this is easy to do. I can do that in 10 minutes. Or like, this is why this is something that's difficult. It's not just a matter of dropping this drag and drop on the screen. There's these things involved with it. And that's nice, because I've really found that people have been really comfortable and happy with having the technical parts of the coding explained to them. If I've spent some time thinking about, well, how do I explain this without using language that aren't terms of art? And a really nice thing for me, to go back to your question again, just early on, is my advisor pointed out to me, you're not special for having to figure out lay language for terms of art in terms of technical things. That's, every dissertator does that. There's really no difference. So like, that really helped me not be like, oh, all defensive about it, and just be like, oh, this is just being pedagogical, like any person that is trying to become an expert in a specific thing. And that is something that I would really like to do beyond just having this site serving people. Have the code base in the GitHub repository become something where people can go and build a site, spin up a site like this without having a technical background. I would really love that to be something that comes out of this, is just having other people make sites like this and use it as a way of learning some technical skills themselves.
Thank you. This has been very interesting, and I really applaud what you're doing. The question is, do you see yourself moving on to other Ulysses or James Joyce projects in the future, or in 5 years this will become automatic, or it'll be taken over by Purdue and you can do something else, or this is your life's work, or how do you see your future in relationship to this project?
That's a great question. I think this will always, I've been thinking about it and working on it for so long that this will always kind of be my important project, where even if I'm not building on it anymore, I'll be going and annotating, and I'll do a reading every other year with people on the site. What I am hoping to do is to offload some of that human work, and also to give people experience of learning skills and having the mentorship that I benefited from by making this a team project. It already is a collaborative project in terms of, like, I couldn't do this without the help of all these people, while at the same time I did a lot of the work myself. I did all the sysadmin, I did all the design. Thinking about that and thinking about how I turn this from a solo project into something that isn't protectively mine anymore and people are making decisions about it. I'm hoping that at Purdue we find a way of having kind of ongoing funding just for the hosting and maintenance costs of it, and that I can build sort of a team of undergraduate and graduate students especially, but faculty and staff as well if they're interested, and having them have this as a place where they can come, and maybe they're not interested in coding, but they're interested in design, or they're interested in studying what happens to a complex modernist text when people start to annotate it. They have theoretical questions maybe. So I'm hoping that by opening that up, that takes a little bit of the effort off of me. This is...
The future of it depends upon a community of interest.
Yes, definitely.
If that dies, or if it's not led by somebody, it dies?
So I have thought about, I have a data plan in store for people, and I've thought about how much time I give people if I need to take the site down, what I'm promising them. I'm promising them that I will email them all of their annotations in a way that's both easy to read and easy to import into the annotator platform. And I'm hoping that what will happen if there's ever people aren't interested, people only want to read it and they don't want to participate actively, if moderating starts to take up too much of my time, that I can transition it from this dynamic site where people can interact with stuff to just a flat static site where people don't really have to put in a lot of time to maintain it and stuff like that. So I have been kind of thinking about both possibilities. In terms of other digital humanities work, I think this is going to continue to be my main place of doing Ulysses-style stuff. I have talked with other people about projects related to it that might spin off or connect at some point. There's a webcomic of Ulysses, a Ulysses scene that is going to be tied into this so that you can go to this comic and have these very thoughtful drawings of what is happening in a scene on the page and then go back into the text. If maybe you don't understand what Stephen looks like, a character, maybe you don't understand the location somebody's in, and that's one way to tie into something else. I know that there's also work on making a digital edition with versioning, making an actual scholarly digital edition of Ulysses out there, and I'll have to think as that is designed, how this ties into something like this. So those are things that I've been thinking about in terms of funding, in terms of how I respect the users on the site by making their work continue to live.
So I think we've got time for one more question, and I know there's been multiple hands, and or maybe it's time to actually call it. Let's call it. There's food. There is Amanda. She's still here. You can grab her individually. Thank you all very much for coming and joining me.
Yes, thank you all.